Should you congratulate Friedrich Merz on his election victory or offer your condolences? The man slated to become Germany's next chancellor is going to have to deal with a slew of crises. An ailing economy, the war in Ukraine, and figuring out how Germany can ensure its own security as Donald Trump pulls the rug out from under the transatlantic relationship. All seemingly intractable problems with consequences not just for Germany and Europe, but for the world. Is Merz the man for the job? Well, before he even gets to all of that, he'll need to form a government, most likely a coalition between his conservatives and the center-left Social Democrats. That's a hard enough task on its own. So this week on To The Point, we're taking a closer look at the country's economic woes and the Trump threat, asking, can Friedrich Merz steer Germany out of crisis? Hello and welcome to this week's edition of To The Point. I'm Claire Richardson in Berlin and so pleased to introduce our fantastic panel this week. We have Arne Delfs, a political reporter with Bloomberg, Christopher F. Schutze, reporter at the New York Times, and a familiar face here on To The Point, American journalist Melinda Crane. Thank you so much for taking the time to all of you. Christopher, going into these elections, there was a real sense of malaise in Germany. Do you think that Germans are feeling more optimistic now that we have these results?
I think Germans are happy that the election campaign is over, I think, and that the vote is decided. And the weather's gotten nicer, so I think they are feeling slightly better. But I'm not sure that we know yet how optimistic people will be about the government until we see the actual government.
Yeah, political forecast, weather forecast is still out. Melinda, one thing that does seem clear, though, is that regardless of who Germans voted for, they do agree that there has been a long list of issues piling up that Germany really needs to deal with. Can you spell out for us just briefly what some of the major problems facing the country are?
I think that sense of malaise that you mentioned is, to some degree, a recognition that Germany's in crisis. But whether the citizens and voters are ready to do what needs to be done to get out of the crisis, for me, remains an open question. There's definitely recognition that Germany has a big economic problem. It's had 3 years of basically no growth and will have very low growth this year, if at all. It has seen a good deal of bankruptcy. It has seen unemployment. So this is, for Europe's biggest economy, this is a very troubling phase. And Germans like stability. They don't like crisis.
No, they certainly do not.
And then secondly, we are seeing this country at the heart of Europe with many, many borders to other countries, looking at a situation where the transatlantic alliance that has guaranteed European and German security for 75 years is looking wobbly. We're looking at a sea change in U.S. foreign policy, and that's especially unnerving for a country that long tried to punch way below its weight when it comes to defense and security. So, two big crises. We need profound leadership in Germany and Germany in Europe. And the question is, will Germans go along? And do we have in Friedrich Merz the leader who can do that?
Yeah, and Arne, maybe you want to pick up just there. Do we have in Friedrich Merz the leader who can make some of these tough changes for Germany?
Well, you know, it has been his dream for, I guess, 25 years to become chancellor. Now, it looks like he will be soon. But I must say the start wasn't ideal. The result was pretty weak. He got in the election, or his party got in the election. He is not really well liked among Germans. I mean, he's just not the guy who draws a lot of... he's not very attractive, especially to female voters, I have the feeling. He has done. He has managed to get the CDU, Christian Democrats, back on track. So that's a real achievement, because that was also in crisis, that party. Now let's see if he can do the same with Germany.
Yeah, let's introduce our viewers a little more in depth to the man who's probably going to be the next chancellor. Friedrich Merz might not be a name that is familiar to many of you watching at home, but he is going to probably be the one at the helm as Germany faces these issues head on. And as we've heard in elections, voters gave his Christian Democrats over 28% of the vote. That was the biggest share that from all of the different parties, but not enough for his party to govern alone.
We won the federal election in 2025. But the party's result was its second worst in its history. Nevertheless, Merz aims to quickly form a coalition, ideally with the Social Democrats, by Easter. The world won't wait for us, nor will it tolerate lengthy coalition negotiations. We need to be able to act swiftly, to take the right steps domestically, and to be present in Europe again, to show the world that Germany has a reliable government once more.
Deutschland wird wieder zuverlässig regiert.
Merz has no government experience, but he had a leading role as a BlackRock executive. It's crucial for the European side of the Atlantic to stand united on the issues that need to be addressed. For example, trade policy is a European matter, not a national one. Treating EU member states differently regarding customs duties is impossible, for instance. Europe must speak with one voice. Can Friedrich Merz reshape a polarized Germany on both national and international fronts?
So let's get one thing out of the way right up front. Melinda, it's not just going to be the Conservatives in government, right? They're most likely going to rule together with the center-left Social Democrats, who came in third place in this election. What do you think we can expect from a coalition between the two?
And by the way, this takes us back to the question you asked before about how German voters see the situation. They were traumatized at the thought that the CDU, everybody knew the CDU would get the largest share. The question was, would the CDU have to govern with two other parties? Because the last German government was a three-party coalition, and the three parties took very divergent views on crucial issues like budgetary issues, how to essentially generate the investment that Germany so badly needs. So there's a sigh of relief that it will be two parties. And these are two parties that are quite different, but may be able to find some good common ground on these two crisis areas. Why? The Social Democrats represent essentially the working population. It's the party of workers, and those workers have a very strong interest in seeing Germany emerge from its economic doldrums. It is absolutely urgent, not only for companies, but for the people they employ. So presumably, there is some room for negotiation here between the two about how they find the way to commit essentially $600 billion in investment in infrastructure, in digitalization, in key areas that could revitalize the economy. Second area, very quickly, defense. Often there's been quite a big gap between these two parties when it comes to defense and security, but that gap is closing fast. I will remind us that the chancellor who will be stepping down, Olaf Scholz, he gave the fieriest speech we have heard from a German political leader on defense. He didn't step up to implement it, but right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, he made it very clear Germany was going to have to start punching at its weight, which it has not been doing. So I think there is room there also for some deal doing to make sure Germany comes up with the investment needed for a much stronger defense posture.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the economic woes that they're facing, Christopher. What are the possibilities of investment in all of those areas that Melinda has just laid out that Germany so badly needs to see?
Well, I think the biggest problem Germany faces is the debt brake, which is this tool that restricts borrowing. And this has been a huge problem also for the previous government because you can't borrow money for things like infrastructure, the things you really need also for defense. And so now we're looking at early negotiations on what we can do to get around this debt brake to actually make the government work, because they know that unless there's some way around this debt brake, they're going to have a hard time actually rising to this moment.
But Arne, if I understand correctly, this debt break, this is something, to change it would require changing the Constitution, right? And you would need more than just the simple majority that the Conservatives and the SPD would have in a coalition together to get it done. So what do you think the prospects are that they're actually able to make these reforms?
Well, actually, the chances are very small that it will be done very quickly, because you need a 2/3 majority in Parliament, in the lower house, which this new government, if it comes together, won't have. So that's why they are now like thinking about approving kind of a special fund or debt break. I think is out of the question, because it's very complicated to do it with the old Parliament, you know, which is...
You mean with the one in power currently?
Which is still kind of existing and which is still there, but in a way, from a democratic point of view, it's kind of problematic actually to do that, of course, because the voters have already elected a new parliament. So there will be also some legal problems, I think, with this.
Definitely. And legal problems translate ultimately into political problems. Some tricks were made by the old coalition to try to reuse corona funds for other purposes. It did not go well, and it was one of the reasons the coalition collapsed. Can I just say, Germany being in crisis is actually also a legal concept, in the sense that there are provisions in the Constitution in a situation of crisis to take particular measures that wouldn't normally be possible. And that is creation of special funds. We've already done it here in Germany for defense, and that fund will have to be expanded and continued. But theoretically, you could even think about doing it in the area of infrastructure, digitalization, perhaps even education is also a form of investment in the future. And I think there is some legal basis for that, but it's going to take tough negotiations and hard work.
It's hard to argue that we are in a crisis. I mean, Germany, if you go out the street, streets and the schools still seem to be working, so it will be a bit hard to make the argument that we are in such a crisis. And we have the Constitutional Court, which might quickly shoot that fund or move whatever down. No?
Well, if I may draw you all away from that just for a moment, just the fact that you do need this kind of investment, I want to look at the foreign policy implications, and across the Atlantic, especially to what we're seeing in the White House with Donald Trump. It's a tectonic shift we're seeing in transatlantic relations, right? And without this kind of investment, how well suited is Germany to tackle all the new problems that are going to come its way?
Well, I think especially on defense, it's impossible. I mean, the only reason that we're even getting close to this 2% spending on defense is because we have this special fund that was approved by all the major parties. And now that runs out in 2027, and then you're not even going to get to 2%. Now, Trump, I think, has been saying, you know, you have to spend at least 3.5%. There's no way Germany would spend most
of your GDP. Just of your GDP,
sorry. Yeah, there's no way to do that unless you're going to just not spend any money on anything else in Germany. So they have to find a way to get another special fund for the military if they want to even get close to even maintain the 2% of GDP on.
And Melinda, what about the prospects of a coordinated European defense policy? We've had Merz here saying it's 5 minutes to midnight for Europe.
Yes, and that is an astonishing statement that Merz made. He made it also on the night he had just been elected. He was on German television, and this man used to be the head of the Atlantic Bridge, which is an organization that tries to support transatlantic ties. He is an absolutely committed transatlanticist. He said, if we can no longer rely on the U.S., and that very much looks to be the case, then we are going to have to dramatically step up our defense and security posture, both here nationally, but also in Europe. Europe essentially is going to have to look into taking on responsibilities that until now have been held by the United States. He also said, we are going to a NATO meeting in May, a very crucial summit. We don't even know what NATO will look like in May. Those are absolutely astonishing remarks on the night of his election. That shows how serious this changing course is.
How do you assess the risk here to European security?
There's a lot of disappointed love, of course, also in this kind of statements Merz made. I think it's important. I think Merz knows the problem, sees the problem. He met Macron last night for 3 hours, they talked, and we're hearing that they were actually already talking about ways how to get like a European defense fund running, or maybe even a European bank, which would be created in order to, provide the financial means for creating a European defense system. It will be huge amounts of money, though. It will be. Knowing Europe, I fear a bit that Germany will pay the bulk of this.
Well, we'll come back to that in just a moment. It does seem clear, though, that the Europeans do see the need to speak with one voice, to be united on this issue. We've also had Emmanuel Macron in Washington this week talking to Donald Trump in an effort to try to get the European view across, to fix this growing divide in U.S.-European relations. And I just want to see if we can take a quick look at their meeting.
The whole world is supposed to see how well these two get along. French President Macron wants to leverage his connection with US President Trump and is advocating for the Western military alliance.
As for France, a lot of my European colleagues are ready to be engaged. But we do need this American backup, because this is part of the credibility of the security guarantees, and this is our collective deterrence capacity.
Concerned about security for Europe as a whole, Macron views Russia as the aggressor and wants continuous support for Ukraine. But Trump recently claimed that in the past 3 years, Europe has not taken significant action to end the war. Are the US and Europe separated by way more than just an ocean?
So, Christopher, how successful do you think this trip was? Was Macron successful in bringing Trump to see the Europeans' perspective?
I actually thought it was artfully done. I thought he did it really, really well. And the problem is whether or not one can sort of see him as sort of a leader figure in Europe. He's facing himself a country, his own country, that has big national problems. And, Scholz has not been really present in the last little while. The question is, can Friedrich Merz step in there? I thought the actual visit was great. I think he did well in sort of being very gentle, but sort of pushing back on some of the key claims. So I think so far so good on that, but now we have to see that there actually is somebody, or there are countries that can sort of step up together in Europe, and we've not seen that before.
Melinda, coming back then to the Franco-German relations, do you think that Merz is going to see a stronger partnership there than his predecessor Olaf Scholz did?
I think he will, but can I just say, to your point, 2 days after that friendly meeting in the Oval Office, we heard Donald Trump saying that the European Union was created to screw, that was his word, America. And we also saw him essentially let the European Union's foreign minister, Kaja Kallas, the Secretary of State, just skip the meeting with her because Europe didn't go along with the U.S. proposed resolution in the UN that did not define Russia as the aggressor. So I fear Macron's efforts will not achieve much. And if we look at the first term that Donald Trump had, Macron traveled to Washington to beg him to please not leave the Paris Agreement or the Iran agreement. And of course, he left both. So I think it's going to be a very tough task for anyone in Europe to try to find a good way to deal with Donald Trump, who basically has an enormous resentment against Europe, not least because it has a huge trade surplus with the U.S., and Donald Trump hates other countries' trade surpluses. I do think that Macron and Merz stand a much better chance of creating a true tandem working together, especially also on defense and security issues. And I think that not least because Friedrich Merz, even before the election, was trying to pick up on suggestions that Macron has made that perhaps the French nuclear weapons could become a major deterrent force for Europe if the U.S. nuclear deterrent is no longer quite as trustworthy. That's a very, very crucial issue. We are going to have to see lots more coordination between European countries when it comes to defense and security. And I think these two leaders, it's true, we don't know how long Macron will be in power, but I think they do have the potential to do that.
And does that come down to shared politics that the two have, or is it to do with their style as leaders leading one another face to face?
Well, I think it's first of all the recognition that that France and Germany have to work together, no matter if they get along or not. I never understood why Scholz was so reluctant, actually, to pick up some of the visions and ideas which came from Paris. And I'm pretty sure Merz will also soon travel to Warsaw to meet Tusk, because that's another important partner, actually, in Europe. You know, they are already at 4% or 4.5% even defense spending, and they are, of course, facing Russia directly. But then also, like, Merz is somebody who was member of the European Parliament, who has a much more European view of things than Scholz, I think, has ever had. I think Scholz, I have the feeling, saw Europe a bit as a nuisance. The European Commission often complained about it. So I think Merz will have a better relation with Brussels, with Paris, and also with Warsaw.
But Merz is also, we should say, seen by some of his political opponents as somewhat abrasive, perhaps speaking before he thinks things through. Do you see parallels to his style of politics to those of Donald Trump?
I mean, that would be going a little far, I think. But I do think they're maybe a bit similar in this sort of, it's more of a macho leadership style. You know, I say it this way because I feel it very strongly, and then we'll try to work around this. And that might be something also that President Trump will kind of recognize, you know, and see that there's somebody, you know, who's like just a different kind of leader, because it's clear that Scholz, if he was still around, you know, he was partnered with Joe Biden. That's not good for him, you know. I mean, it's just like, this was a guy he never really took particularly seriously anyway. So just having somebody who's new and who has a different style might be good.
I think Friedrich Merz might be somewhat more likely to positively impress, maybe that's too strong a word, but to at least be seen by Donald Trump. It just starts out with things like, Donald Trump loves people who look like they came from central casting. And Friedrich Merz is tall and does a lot of sports, and he used to work for the BlackRock asset management company, and he's a pilot and flies his own private jet. Those are things that if Donald Trump bothered to read the dossier, he might actually find sort of impressive. Nonetheless, Donald Trump...
He also hates Merkel.
Yeah, that's true.
Also united on that front.
And also, he's, for German standards, he's wealthy. And I think that's another thing that's really, like, you know...
But I think, nonetheless, the fact is, Friedrich Merz does have this impulsive side that somewhat resembles Donald Trump, also in the sense that he just will kind of try something out to see if it flies, like his migration maneuver. I won't go into the details of that. But to be the kind of leader that Germany needs and that Europe desperately needs, he must be focused. That will be absolutely crucial. And that depends partly on his team. Can they try to keep him on track so that he's really putting his energy, and he has quite a bit of energy, into the areas that desperately need his attention.
Now, we are almost coming up to the end of the show, so I just want to pull this back and look again at a possibility of a common defense, and just how likely you think it would be that we see this supported strongly by the French and by Merz's government.
Oh, we will get it, because it has to come.
It has to come.
It has to come.
Do we know in what terms?
There's just no alternative. Well, you know, I think Germany, France will be like the main actors in this kind of European defense. And it's not only about like aiding Ukraine aid anymore. It's really like about like defending Europe against Russia.
It's a wider mandate.
And I think, even though Germans always tend to be pacifists rather, but I think even Germans begin to understand what's at stake here.
Yeah, but this will, of course, all cost a lot of money. Is it clear how they're going to pay for it, given all those economic pressures we were talking about earlier?
Well, I think that's the big question, and that's why we're talking so much about debt break, because we're borrowing money for this. I think the other question is, how long will you have the support of people in this? I mean, the two sort of extreme parties, the ones who actually were the big winners of the election, to bring it back to that, they're both, pacifist parties or pro-Russian, depending on how you want to see it. So these are not, if these people ever get any kind of power, I think then it'll look actually pretty bad for European defense, because the idea is like, why should we spend on weapons?
Yeah. How likely do you think that is, Melinda, as we look further ahead to the next election?
This is why it's so crucial that this government work on the economic pillar and not only on the defense pillar. They must deal with two crises simultaneously. That's a very tough task, but it's a must. May I just say, we shouldn't forget Brussels. Brussels is taking extraordinary steps at a much more rapid rate than we have gotten used to in terms of trying to weave together European defense. So it's not only about these two big European member countries, it's very much also about Brussels leadership.
Well, thank you so much for all of your insights today. It's been a fascinating discussion, plenty ahead for Germany and its neighbors. You've been watching To The Point from our studios here in Berlin. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are watching on YouTube, leave us a comment, let us know what you thought, and see you next time.